This is a proper dysfunctional episode, and I am sure it is going to ruffle some feathers. Dr. Jess Taylor is a psychologist and Sunday Times best-selling author known for her fearless critique of psychiatry, psychology, and the systems that pathologize human suffering. This episode challenges some of the mainstream narratives around psychiatry and mental health. My guest, Dr. Jess Taylor, is unapologetic and blunt in the way that she calls out the systems that she believes keeps people stuck. That's what I want this podcast to be about. I want to have difficult conversations that challenge the current systems. As a bit of a warning, if you have found meaning in a Western mental health or psychiatric diagnosis, this could be an uncomfortable ride for you. Know that none of what me or Dr. Jess Taylor says is an attack on you. This is about questioning the structures and industries that profit from people's distress. Some of you might disagree with a lot of what we say in here. Some of you might fiercely disagree with some of what we say in here. Sit with the discomfort, see what resonates, and leave everything else. But whatever you do, sit tight, hold on to your hat, and enjoy what I believe is a very powerful conversation. Dysfunction is everywhere. In our families, in our cultures, and in our systems. And this is Dysfunctional, the podcast that helps you name the things that most people can't or won't see. Let's call it out, break it down, and maybe even start a bloody revolution. So, Dr. Jessica Taylor, I am very excited. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. I'm excited to talk to you finally.
Yeah, it feels like we were just saying just before we hit record, it feels like everybody has been saying that I should connect with you and do something with you. So when I did start the podcast, you were on my radar, and then I don't know, a few more tags in, I was like, let's do it.
Yeah. Everybody kept tagging me, being like, you guys talk about like exactly the same things. You have to talk to each other. And then like I saw your name keep coming up. I was like, who is this dude? And then I was like, oh yeah, no, we do say the same stuff.
Yeah, like slightly different context
Yeah.
and angles, I guess, but like, yeah, it's the same thing. So for people that don't know who you are, can you just tell us a little bit about that and maybe some stuff about how you got to where you are doing what you do?
Yep. So my name's Jess. I am a psychologist. My PhD is in forensic psychology. I specialise in the trauma and abuse of women and girls. My PhD focused on the psychology of victim blaming, self-blame, shame, and trauma, that kind of thing. And also about the myths and stereotypes that society and systems and individuals use against victims of abuse. And then I suppose like as an almost like a natural evolution of my thinking, I then started to become really fascinated in mental health, pathologization, and the use of people's mental health against them, because I don't work from a position that mental health and so-called mental illness in the medical model is a positive thing, but that's only because of what I was observing. So, you know, I'd studied victim blaming and worked with the government and worked in courts and police and stuff about how we actually tackle victim blaming that's so deeply embedded in systems. But then I noticed that actually one of the most successful forms of victim blaming was to frame a victim as mentally ill. And then I was like, that's a whole other fight. So most people, I would say these days, because of me writing books and, you know, the books did really well and doing a lot of TV and a lot of like social media and have a big social media following, usually they know me for the arguments that I make around trauma, around pathologization, and like, you know, sort of talking to people about not framing themselves as mad, not framing themselves as having a mental health issue when they've actually been through lots of trauma. So yeah, it's like general. And then I run a company. I also do a lot of mentoring, and I work all over the world. I do a lot of confidential contracts for police forces and government and stuff. Generally, either where there's issues of misogyny, homophobia, sexism, racism within the force or within the particular setting, or where there's been issues come up in inspections where they're not supporting victims with their trauma, or the interestingly also that the workforce isn't supported with their trauma, because vicarious trauma is huge, and a massive part of my day-to-day job is dealing with vicarious trauma of professionals and how to get systems to understand that they're traumatizing their workforce. So do lots of interesting stuff around that. But yeah, it's been a really interesting journey.
I want to start because there's so much that you just said, and I'm like, like I'm part of me's like, where do I start here? I want to start with the pathologization stuff, right? When it comes to mental health, because this is something that I have become very aware of and open to, particularly probably in like the last maybe 5 years. But I think, you've probably been on this journey a lot longer than that, right? Where have you always thought that? Have you always had an inkling that the way that we frame mental health is not ideal?
No, definitely not. I think that it's really important to be honest about that as well. So right at the beginning of my career, when I was teaching and training, I actually used to deliver mental health training that was like pro medication, pro mental health, like, oh, you've got this disorder, if you hit this many symptoms you need to go to your doctor, like all of that. And I would have been like 20, 21, 22 when I was sort of delivering that kind of thing. And that was when I was working in victim services and in sexual violence services. And I was delivering that to professionals, training counselors and therapists. But I also used to do one-to-one and group work with people who had been subjected to abuse and violence. And I was saying the same stuff, right? It was actually one experience that I had at about 22. I think that probably, no, there was two experiences that I look back on now that really shocked me and probably put me on this path. The first was I met a child. She was 14 or 15 years old. I still remember her face. I know her name. And she had been raped. And the local NHS trust had put her through multiple rounds of ECT, of electroconvulsive therapy, because she'd been raped. And they said that she was suffering from like depression, and she'd only been raped 6 months ago. And they'd not, for me, my view on that was like, you've not given this child enough time to even integrate what's happened to her, and you've already started ECT. So she was part of a group that I was doing life story work with, and like, sort of, doing weekly sessions with. And she would turn up to my sessions and she couldn't remember things. She would fall asleep in the middle of a sentence. She couldn't focus for more than 5 minutes. She felt sick. She had headaches. And there was a couple of my sessions where she would just sleep on the sofa the entire time because she couldn't function. And I remember just being like, this cannot be right. Like, what are we doing to this kid's brain? Like, we're giving her electroconvulsive therapy. So that was like my first experience where I was like, why are we not validating that she's traumatized? She's allowed to be traumatized. She's been raped. She's like 14, 15 years old. Why the hell have we put her on electroconvulsive therapy?
Can you just explain for people what are listening what that is, convulsive therapy?
Electroconvulsive therapy is a treatment that most people think is something that just happens in horror movies and in like Victorian times, but the NHS still use ECT in every area of the UK. Today, absolutely. There's still research ongoing trying to get it, sort of trying to highlight the damage that it causes. So there's a Professor John Reed. He specialises in demonstrating the harms and the risks of ECT, and he's in the UK. He does all that work. So anyway, so for those of you that don't really know how ECT works, the premise of, and when it was invented, was that if you send electrical currents through the brain and cause repeated seizures in that person, you will in some way like reset the mental health issue by causing repeated seizures. So in the UK, they do it under a general anaesthetic. So you're put under a general anaesthetic and then they put increasing voltages, currents of electricity through your brain until you have multiple seizures under general, so that you don't remember it and so that you can't feel it. And then when they bring you around, it's supposed to be like a treatment for depression, but a lot of
that's mental. So you've got a child, like you're describing, like there's a 15-year-old 6 months post what happened, and they're doing that to
Yeah.
her. I don't know how anybody can listen to that and be okay with it. But sorry, right?
No.
Just
Yeah.
let's continue the story. So she's turned up to these sessions, and then that was one of the moments where you start to think something's not right.
Oh yeah, because I was sort of thinking, first of all, why have we jumped to such a severe treatment?
Mm.
Because in the UK, it's because of Professor Reed's work, we know that the majority of ECT is done without consent. It's done as a forced treatment. It's not done with consent. It's done under orders where doctors can force you to have ECT even if you don't want it. And actually, she's quite rare because the majority of people who are forced to have ECT in the UK are actually women over the age of 60, according to NHS statistics. So it's quite a specific demographic. So she's actually really young. So, to be a child having repeated rounds of ECT is actually really quite rare. And I'll be honest, like, I've probably only come across that a couple more times in the last 15 years. But I think it was just one of those things, yeah, that I didn't know at the time she was having ECT. I just knew that she would sometimes be in my session and then she'd zone out and then she'd sort of look at me and be like, what are we doing? And there was a couple of times when I got really concerned. So I said to her mom, who was dropping her off, I was like, she's super tired and she really struggles to understand or like focus on what we're doing. I was like, is she sleeping enough? Is she okay? Like, is she having nightmares since she's been raped? Or do you think maybe she's disassociating? And she was like, oh no, she's been this way ever since they started the ECT. And I was like, what? Because I think at that point in my career, I'm like 22. I didn't even know we gave ECT to kids. Like,
I mean, I don't even think I knew that. I don't think I knew that now, and I'm like, I've read a lot of stuff.
yeah, it was a huge deal for me. And then I think the second one, which is slightly less shocking, but it was still enough for me to like challenge me, was that I met a woman who had come again for counselling because she'd been sexually abused. And she was sat in the waiting room. And I was like, how's it going? How are you getting on with your new therapist and stuff? And she was like, oh, yeah, I like the therapist. Therapist is nice, but I don't think any of it will work. And I was like, oh, right, how come? And she said, well, the doctors have told me I've got treatment resistant depression and there's no cure. And my brain will always be like this. And I was like, why would a doctor tell you that? Like, that's not real. That's not a thing. But like, and so I just like kept calm and was like, oh, right, okay. And I was like, what do they mean by treatment resistant? She's like, they've tried me on every pill, they've done everything, it just doesn't work. Like, so they've diagnosed me with treatment resistant depression. There's nothing that will work for me. This is basically my life now. And I was like, what? Like, so I just obviously in the moment I was just like, oh, I really hope that you'll get something out of the therapy and that hopefully when you leave our service you won't feel like that and that kind of thing. But I walked away from it and thought, what doctor is telling someone like basically you're doomed, you're going to be like this forever, sorry, bye? Like, I just don't understand why we would behave like that to a human. So like, again, like, this is before I've developed my thinking, and this is even before I've done my PhD, this is even before I've finished my degree. So I'm really young and I'm just like starting out, I'm having these like little thoughts that are like, that doesn't sound right to me. And then I think the other thing that happened around that time that really influenced me was that I was heading up the all of the counselling services and the helpline service. So we had a really busy helpline. We had hundreds of clients. And then we also had face-to-face counselling services. And it was me that trained all the therapists and counsellors. It was me that trained all the volunteers. It was me that did all their like supervision. It was me that allocated cases and stuff. So as we were getting these referrals through, we went through this period around 2013 where almost every single referral that I got said BPD on it, borderline personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, borderline personality disorder. And I was like, after maybe a few weeks of this, I was like, what the hell is happening? Why is everybody being referred to us have borderline personality disorder? That can't be right. I noticed it was the same mental health team. And it was the same like team that were referring it through. And it was almost as if every time a victim opened their mouth and was like, I've been abused, I've been sexually abused, or I've been raped, they were like, yep, borderline personality disorder. And so that caught my attention because I was like, what's happening there? So I remember one night I was so fascinated by it after, months of this happening. Oh, is that okay? Yeah.
It's gone now. Don't worry.
Okay, cool.
They just test the alarm.
Yeah,
That's
that's
it.
all right.
Gone.
Um, Okay, so one night I was sat and I thought, I'm going to go through all these cases, I'm going to sit and figure this out. So I got all the cases out of the filing cabinet because this is way before the days of CMS and like computer systems. And I got all the files out and I laid them all out on the floor and I was reading the referrals, and the referrals were all written in the same way. It was almost like really derogatory, sort of like that they believe they were sexually abused, or they've alleged sexual abuse, and then it was like things about their moods, their identity, attachment, that kind of thing. And then it was always the same language. It was always like borderline personality disorder needs therapy. And I suppose at the time, having never questioned those constructs, the first thing really at a really basic level was I just thought statistically there can't be that many people that have all got borderline personality disorder coming through every single day on referrals. So then I think my first thought was, is that team biased? Like, does that team have a bias? Like, are they seeing everybody through this lens? But then I suppose as my thinking developed, as I got, smarter and read more and, studied more and noticed more and questioned more, I realized actually that it's just a way of pathologizing victims. It's extremely common.
So you might not know the answer to this question, but do like the Western medical model, does it believe, like, will its line be that if they experience, if a woman experiences abuse, she's likely to get BPD as a result?
Yeah.
Or that's what they say, so it makes you BPD?
Yeah, it's one of the lines that they tell their patients and that they talk about. So one of the lines is the sort of biochemical thing, which is they've got some sort of chemical imbalance in their brain. That's what's causing these mental health issues. Or the other line is it's genetic, it's hereditary. Their mom and dad had this and this, and therefore they're more likely to have this. But the other thing that I hear really commonly is this sort of strange, sort of twisted, not quite accurate, sort of carefully created narrative, which is like, they've been traumatized, they've been through sexual abuse, and now they've developed a personality disorder because of the abuse. Whereas I suppose my position is like, there is no personality disorder there. All you're seeing is trauma. You're just framing it as a disorder of their personality.
Yeah, and I think so. Like, the common belief for me, one of the things that I've established as a belief, and one of the things I started to see on a broader level of what you're talking about, is how often people would now say to me, I don't know, my marriage ended and I lost my job. And then after a few weeks of that happening, I developed a mental health problem.
Yeah.
I developed depression, or I started to struggle with my mental health. And I'd always be like, no, surely you're supposed to feel shit for like a prolonged period of time after something like that. So when you're talking about like extreme trauma in the way that you are, I just don't see how it's beneficial. And I don't know if you'll have a response to this, but what I find interesting is how the medical establishment, whatever you want to call it, they will cling on to this rather than hearing that and going, okay, yeah, maybe you're right. Let's explore it in a different way. They will start by going, oh, it causes BPD and it's like, hereditary. And then when that sort of falls down, they'll go off down another tangent. And what a lot of people say to me now is like, yeah, well, maybe it doesn't cause it, but they need that label to then get the help that they deserve. And I'm like, what? Like, why do you think they cling on to it so much? I know that's probably a big question.
There's loads of reasons. So the first is social control. There's a lot of benefit of being able to control people via labels and identities. Identity politics is incredibly powerful globally right now, and the psychiatry is a form of identity politics. So it's a way of identifying into like a collective, like ADHD or BPD or depression or mental health. So partially that's because it's a form of social control, and that's why psychiatry was originally developed anyway. So it's a way of like, these are the people in society that we think are weird, or these are the people in society that we think are dysfunctional. So we're just going to label them and shove them over there because they're not what we want. They're not behaving in the way that we want them to behave. They're not talking in the way we want them to talk, they're not working enough, they're not making enough money or paying enough tax, and therefore they're broken, so they're over there. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is that psychiatry has been successfully positioned as a science, as a medical science, and it's not on par with medicine. You know, if you consider in the last 150 years the medical advancements that we have made, like everything from like a defib, you know, being able to like design something that can restart somebody's heart, organ transplants, blood transfusions, cancer treatments. What has psychiatry done in 150 years? We still lock people up and give them ECT. What have we done? Nothing.
Yeah, that's and like, do you think there's a like
It's
a
a religion.
arrogance is the
It's a religion. I think psychiatry is best understood as a set of beliefs. It's cultish. And that's why you said, why do they hold on to it? Because they've not been taught a science. They've not been taught critical thinking. They've been taught a belief system. So when you present these people with evidence, I'm talking professionals now. I'm not talking about people who've actually been indoctrinated into this as a victim, where they've been convinced by their doctor that they're mentally ill. That's different. But if you're a professional and you've gone through this training and you have been told categorically, these people have disordered personalities, these people have bipolar, and the prevailing theory is that it might be genetic or it might be biochemical, and anybody who says anything different is just in denial. And then you're presenting them with evidence and going, hang on, but why does every single disorder in the DSM correlate with abuse and trauma? Why does every single thing correlate with adversity? Don't you think that's odd? And it's the way they're like, nope, that's got nothing to do with it. It's definitely chemicals. And you're sort of like, yeah, you're either completely like shutting down any form of critical thinking here, or you are aware this is flawed and you're becoming defensive. Because I had to shift my belief systems. Like I used to believe this stuff. Like I taught that stuff. I taught about antidepressants and that sort of thing. I taught about mental health issues and criteria and symptoms and going to your doctor and all that sort of stuff. I had to go through my own evolutionary process, but I see a lot of professionals out here who are not willing to do that level of thinking.
I think also and I guess you've kind of highlighted that in a lot of what you said, but a lot of this comes to control, right? When I look at like mental illnesses over the past, right? There was once I forget the name of it, but there was a mental illness for people that were trying to flee slavery, right? So if you constantly tried to flee slavery, they labeled you as mentally ill, right? And the obvious one that people talk regularly about is that homosexuality was still a disorder because it just reflects the opinions of the time, right? And so what we're taking, and women cop the most of this, right? We take women when they've been abused, and because it's harder to tackle the systemic issues that allow that abuse to happen, we then make a judgment of how women, even young girls, as you're stating, should be reacting post. And like, let's face it, probably the people that are coming up with the set of how these women and girls should be are probably a certain type of person, and most of them men. Is that like a wild assumption?
No, because so the task force for the DSM was predominantly, exclusively men for decades. The way that the mental disorders are essentially dreamt up is just via a committee. It's like a voting system. So somebody will say, oh, I've created this disorder, or I've invented this disorder, or my theory is this disorder exists. I want it in the next version of the DSM. And then it's voted in or out. That's it. Like So then if you know the right people and everybody agrees with you, your disorder's getting in there. And if you don't know enough people or nobody agrees with you, that disorder's not getting in there. And it's, this isn't science. And it's about time that people realize that. So yeah, like the majority of it, was men, but that's not the same anymore. Lots and lots of women are psychiatrists, and lots of women are misogynistic. So, women are capable of misogyny, women are capable of oppression, women are capable of abuse and harm of other people. So, when women are in these systems, they very often replicate patriarchal norms. Like women will just go along with it and they become part of the problem. They're not victims.
It's crazy because just for like thinking of the people listening as well, I was astounded when I don't remember what book it was that I read, but within that book, they interviewed one of the head people in one of the more recent DSM. I don't think it was the latest one. and he asked them how they came up with the length of time that you need to feel down in order to be depressed, right? And I think it was something like 9 days, right? But I might be wrong on the days. But the guy in the book said, how did you come up with 9 days? Like, why isn't it 10 days or 8 days? And he's like, well, we just had a bit of a vote and we thought 10 days was a bit too long and 8 was not quite enough. So we went with 9. And that's the science that we are fed. And like, you hear that, and I think a lot of people will listen and think that's not true. That can't be how it's done. But this isn't like diabetes, is it? Where you get a set of symptoms, then you go to the doctor, and then like they take a blood test. This is the key thing, yeah? There's no physical markers. So we're talking about opinion. I want to ask you, but I want to talk, if we can, a little bit about your opinion on the whole chemical imbalance theory, right? Because chemical imbalance theory, essentially, again, just setting this up for people that are listening, we were told for a long time that depression was simply a chemical imbalance in your brain, and we give you pills to balance those chemicals back up, right? They sort of quietly, in mainstream media, which I was quite amazed about actually, fairly recently, admitted that it was essentially made up and wasn't true.
Yeah. Well, we've got Joanna Moncrief and her team to thank for that, because, and a lot of others that have been arguing around the chemical imbalance theory for years, many years, even before I was born, before you were born, that people have known for a long time that the chemical imbalance theory was a marketing strategy. It's a really seductive narrative to feed to the public that, like, oh, it's not your fault, it's not anything around you. It's a chemical in your brain, and if you take this pill, you'll be okay. Like, it's simple, it's seductive. People want to hear that. They don't want someone necessarily sat opposite them being like, look, the reason you feel like this is because your partner is horrible, your job is terrible, your family is toxic, you live in an area full of crime, you're living in poverty, you're expected to keep up with capitalism, and you're drowning. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, people don't, that's not what people want to hear. They want to hear like, oh yeah, do you know what it is? It's that you've got a serotonin imbalance in your brain. If you take this pill, it'll increase the serotonin in your brain. You'll be fine. Like, it's a simple solution. But the thing is, so the term antidepressant is a marketing term. They're not really called antidepressants. That is, in the same way an antipsychotic medication, that's a marketing term. They're not actually antipsychotics. Some people who have epilepsy are on the same medications as so-called they're an antipsychotic. So the people who have been told you've got bipolar, take this pill, are on the same medication as people who have epilepsy. Like, it's not an antipsychotic, it's a group of drugs. So the marketing term is really clever, especially around antidepressants, because it was pushed into the public narrative in the 50s and the 60s, and it was sort of like, you feel sad, you feel these things are going on. This is like post-war era, and it was targeted at women predominantly that were at home. And it was like mother's little helper, take these pills, they'll make you happy, they'll solve all your problems. You can do all the housework and look after the children and you'll be happy again, take these pills. And it was so intelligently marketed that if you actually look on the internet, if you're interested in this, all of the old adverts are still there. You can find, I've got a collection of them at home that you can look at, and it's like this picture of a woman with her perfectly permed hair, and she's pushing a 1950s Hoover. She's got this beautiful skirt on, she's got full makeup, kids are there, and she's like, oh, I'm taking my pills, and I'm my husband's going to come home and he's going to have dinner on the table, and my life's sorted because I'm taking my happy pills, right? And so it just snowballed from there, and people don't realize that as the generations move on and people die and then they have children and then they bring their children up and they bring their children up, that level of marketing is embedded into the social fabric of how you understand things. So, by the time like me and you were born, antidepressants is just part of the vernacular. It's like, oh yeah, you go to the doctors, you get antidepressants, you feel depressed. Like, it's just a brain chemical imbalance, So it's very intelligent and very successful marketing, but crucially, it's a lie, and that's the most important thing, is that we have never been able to prove or test for a specific brain chemical imbalance that causes so-called mental health issues. So, not least that we don't actually have a way of testing it. You can't go to your doctor and say, can I have that test to check the serotonin in my brain, please? Because they'll be like, well, we don't have one of those tests. We have this questionnaire, and we can we can ask you 10 questions, and if you hit 4 of them, you can have the pills, So, which again is just a marketing tool that the pharmaceutical companies developed in order to get more and more customers. This isn't a scientific tool. So, I got in loads of trouble a few years ago because I spoke on my social media and I said to people, the next time your doctor tells you that they think you have a brain chemical imbalance, ask them for a test. Ask them to prove it. Ask them what level your brain chemicals are at, and ask them which brain chemicals, and ask them how they determined that. And I got in trouble because I people put complaints in and stuff to my registration body being like, she can't say this, and I'm like, why shouldn't people be informed about their health? Like, if somebody said to me, if I walked into the doctor's office and the doctor said to me, you're diabetic, I'd be like, how the hell do you know that without a blood test? Like, can't we do a fasting glucose test? Or like, if somebody said to me, you have high blood pressure and you need to take these pills, I'd be like, you haven't taken my blood pressure though, so how the fuck would you know that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's weird that we've accepted it in mental health, where somebody can sit down and after 10 minutes be like, you've got a serotonin imbalance in your brain, you need to take these pills, and we've gone, okay.
Yeah, and I think that as an option, it can be very alluring, right? As a victim of
Yeah, of course.
a system that's flawed, right? Because I look at myself, right? I worked in a factory, right? And I when I worked in this factory, I always had the aim of getting up to be transport manager, which was the highest I could get, right?
Yeah.
And that would mean I was on the most money, I'd be in the office and all that sort of stuff. And I remember I worked my way up to it, got there, and then I fell into this deep depression, right? As what they would call a deep depression. I was anxious all of the time. I felt very, very down. I started having feelings of I don't want to be here anymore.
Yeah.
This is all too much, right? And at that stage, I would have fitted every criteria for taking medication and stuff like that. Because of the journey I was on, I got sober a number of years before. It didn't sit right with me with going to the doctor and being told that, because I was like, I know why this is. I've got no purpose in my life.
Yeah.
And I hate my job. And I could have gone to the doctors and took medication and then started to just live a life of, I am a depressed and anxious man and I take these medications and they help me, right? What I did is I started volunteering at a charity and got purpose in my life, and then as a result I ended up leaving my job. However, I've always had a little bit about me, right? Whatever that means, right? And I know that not everybody possesses that, and I don't say that with arrogance, I say it with compassion, because this is what I think people miss when I talk about this, and I bet there's a lot of people that miss what you're saying, because you're passionately talking about the problem. Yeah, I'd imagine there's people that listen that are diagnosed with depression and take antidepressants and think that you're attacking, not think that you're attacking them, but feel like you're not on their side with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Everything that you're saying is about them, isn't it? About what's right for them. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, of course. Because people do take it personally. I'm used to that. And when I lecture on it, when I'm lecturing at universities, or if I'm teaching somewhere, if I'm training, I will very often start the day by saying, statistically, a third of you in this room are taking some form of antidepressant or anxiety medication or even antipsychotics, and that I know that what I'm going to say is going to feel really personal, but I'm talking about systemic issues of, it is wrong to convince millions and millions of people that they are mentally ill when actually we are leaving them in abuse, poverty and toxic situations and distress and global instability, and then being like, it's all in your head, mate, take a pill. So people still get personally offended, and that's, again, it comes back to identity politics, which it's not, I'm not doing it on purpose. So I don't necessarily, I used to feel really bad about it. I used to think oh God, I'm really upsetting and offending people, but I know that I would never, and I never have, said anything personal about anybody's personal experiences, but I do talk systemically a lot. And my argument on this is that I should be able to talk about, the fact that millions and millions of people every single year are being put on these medications needlessly, and it is impacting them chemically, biologically, psychologically, emotionally for the rest of their lives. And then there's no consequences to that. So if that person is harmed by that medication, they have no way of suing. They have no way of undoing it. They have no way of making complaints. They have nothing that they can do by that point because they've already been framed as mentally ill, so nobody will listen to them anyway. But I think that some people, I have had that where people have said, she just believes that these things, don't affect us, or that we're supposed to be fine. I was like, I'm always like the same. I'm like, no, I'm saying they do affect you. I'm saying they're not a mental illness. I'm saying you're not crazy. I'm validating that everything you're telling me is true. So you're telling me that you can't get out of bed. You're telling me that you have nightmares. You're telling me you have palpitations every day. You're telling me that you feel like shit. You're telling me that you hate yourself. You're telling me that you feel like there's no purpose in life and that you'd rather be dead. I'm accepting all those things. I'm saying, yeah, I agree. I believe you. I think you do feel like that. What I'm saying is I don't think you're mental. I think that your response is valid, and I don't think that you should then get some label on your medical files for the rest of your life that claim that you have an incurable mental disorder because you feel these valid feelings. I don't think that's fair on you, and I think that it's hard for people to hear that when they've almost attached their entire identity to the diagnosis, to the label, that their entire life revolves around the fact that they're ADHD or OCD or bipolar or borderline or, depressed or have anxiety or whatever it is, whatever language, they end up using. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like everything that happens and every way that they see themselves, it gets shaped and it gets seen through this lens of like, I am this thing, that's why I am this way. And it keeps them trapped for periods of time in their lives where maybe their doctor is just increasing their dose. Oh, this isn't working anymore. Let's try another pill. Increase the dose. Maybe we should try another pill as well. Maybe you can take 2 pills. Increase the dose. Before you know it, these people are in their 30s and 40s are on 6 pills a day.
Yeah.
And they don't feel any better.
And what's fascinating, one of the things that I find fascinating, and that for me highlights the kind of power dynamics that are at play from a systemic point of view here, right, is I look at my son, right, and my son's school and the people that are involved with my son, and he has lots going on in his life that I won't go into, right, but I can see the way that he feels makes perfect sense based on the type of person that he is and the things that he's experienced, right, and nothing, by the way, pisses me off more than hearing my son talk about an injustice that's happened to him and somebody listen to it and the first thing they say to him is, do you feel a strong sense of justice all of the time? And I'm like, don't you dare pathologize his very fucking appropriate reaction to what's going on. But they've reached this stage where I am getting to a point here.
No, I know.
They've reached this stage. Yeah, they've reached this stage where they go, he's does great in his life. It's just at school, and there are medications that you can take in the morning that will wear off by the time he gets home from school. And I'm like, no, surely this is pointing to the fact that school isn't for him. It's the summer holidays at the moment, and my son has he has absolutely no problems in his life whatsoever. Now, the point I'm making here, and this is what I find quite fascinating, is I posted something about it on LinkedIn, right? And I was like, I'd rather take him out of school than medicate him, right? And a lot of people, and this has shifted in the last few years, because couple of years ago, everyone would have just gone mental at me, said you're abusing him and all that sort of stuff, right? Whereas what's shifted a little bit now is that a lot of people are going, yeah, actually, it probably is school, but you'll never change that. So the next best thing is to medicate him. Mm-hmm. And it's like almost this acceptance that, yeah, we don't really want to do that, but there's no other choice.
Yeah, it's the defeatism, isn't it? So I see that in the education system. I see what you're saying. Like, you are right. That happens all the time. But also, like, more broadly, you get it with people who are very traumatized and have been through lots of things in their lives, and they'll go and they'll listen to me speak, or they'll like watch all my videos, and they'll be like, yeah, this is all well and good, Jess, but the systems that you propose, they don't exist. So we need the pills because we have nothing else. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not good enough. So basically what we're saying is, we won't fund trauma support. We won't deal with the level of offenders and abusers in society. We won't deal with bullying at school. We won't deal with poverty. We won't deal with, hate crime. We won't deal with the fact that our societies are getting more and more toxic by the fucking second, but we will give you a pill. So,
Yeah.
in that like on that basis, it's like living in this weird dystopian novel where it's like you live in a shit society, but if you just take this pill, then you can convince yourself that the problem is within you and you are the cause and the solution to all your own problems. Take our pills. Like it's fucked up. It's like
Yeah.
Black Mirror.
And it becomes, I look at like any important change that's happened through the history of society has been led by people who were called crazy for doing it. So
Yeah, always.
I always think of like the suffragettes. Yeah. They were, when they did what they did and they like starved themselves and did all of that stuff to make sure that we got the vote, to make sure that women got the vote, sorry, before they got the vote, everybody would have been saying to the suffragettes, just stop it. Why are you doing this? Just stay at home. We don't need the vote. You'll never change it, and all that kind of stuff. And they were labeled as the crazy ones. And I feel like that's where I'm at with it. I sort of don't begrudge anybody doing what they need to do to get through the moment. But unless we challenge the system will just keep winning and profiting off of what it's doing.
Yeah, for sure. But we've done that to everybody in history, like artists, we've done that. I mean, for God's sake, look at the fact that now Van Gogh is being posthumously diagnosed as schizophrenic. Everybody says like, oh, everybody knows Van Gogh was schizophrenic. That's why he was a genius. Oh, bullshit. Like, what about Nikola Tesla? Was deliberately framed as totally fucking mental, and yet here we are in 2025 using all of his technology. What about Alan Turing? Was
Yeah.
deliberately framed as mental because he was gay, and then they went after him and locked him up, even though he broke the Enigma code. If you look at history, look at Malcolm X. Like Malcolm
Yeah.
X was talking about black rights and trying to mobilize black communities to understand what was happening to them and give them the power back. Framed as schizophrenic, framed as dangerous, Black Panther movement, exactly the same, framed as having psychosis, being psychotic, mentally unstable black men that would go out and rape and kill people, if you actually look at it, it's everywhere. Like even somebody as little as me, I am constantly framed as mentally ill by my peers and by people that don't agree with me, because whether anybody wants to admit this or not, mental illness and psychiatry is not a science. It's a form of stigma. It's a way of silencing and shutting people down. Look at, for example, how the concept of conspiracy theorists work. Look at the fact that in the DSM, multiple forms of psychosis relate to people who are whistleblowing.
Yeah.
This isn't a coincidence. This is deliberate. And, when I studied it and when I focused on it and when I started writing books about it and I really got into it and I started thinking about, hang on a minute, there's a connection here between who do we diagnose? We diagnose victims, we diagnose whistleblowers, we diagnose people who say uncomfortable things, we diagnose people who believe they're being stalked, watched and monitored, we diagnose people who are eccentric, we diagnose people who refuse to conform to society, we diagnose people that behave in ways that we don't particularly like or want, we diagnose people with political beliefs that we don't agree with at that particular point in politics and history. It's a social, political and historical construct. That's all psychiatry is. And that, as the times move, it moves with it. Hence why you could be framed as being mentally ill for being gay. And interestingly, you were more likely to be framed as mentally ill and then forced into treatment if you were a man, if you were a gay man, because at the time, socially and politically and religiously, because of the church, the hatred and the focus was on gay men. It was not on gay women. And that was because lesbianism was not seen as a real thing. It was seen as just like women being silly. So at the time, even the DSM, when they talk about homosexuality, they're actually referring to men. And so the majority of people who were affected by the psychiatric diagnosis and then being sectioned and being forced into conversion therapies and other forms of horrific therapy like homophobic, and oppressive therapies, it was men. When I was writing Sexy But Psycho, I really struggled to find historical records of lesbians being forced into the same sort of thing because they kind of flew under the radar a little bit. And the narrative, I suppose, from psychiatrists and physicians at the time was that women who were sexually attracted to other women or were even in relationships with other women, they were just a bit weird. And it wasn't the same hatred. Whereas men having sex with men was an abomination, which comes from the church and comes from organised religion, because psychiatry and organised religion are connected completely, and people don't understand that the roots of psychiatry are from the church. You know, like the first asylums were set up by the church. That's you know, the church has always influenced psychiatry and what is and what isn't a mental illness. People just don't know their history. I feel like doctors, nurses, psychologists, everybody should be taught the history of psychiatry and mental health and psychology and understand its religious roots. Because when I teach that and I lecture on that topic, I just have people sat in the room with their jaws open because they're like, why the fuck has nobody ever taught us the roots of these belief systems? And I'm like, because you're not supposed to know.
Yeah, because it wouldn't fit the structure that exists, right?
Well, also,
And I
it
think,
didn't frame it as a science. You can't be like, the church created these things and then locked thousands of people up in their asylums where they converted them to Christianity as a cure for mental illness. And now we still lock people up in those same asylums, in those same settings, and we force them into medication therapies that we were doing in 1910 and 1920. You can't then claim that that's a science.
yeah, yeah. And I think one of the important things to understand when you're listening as well, for people that are listening to this, is that many of us would like to believe that if we lived in, say, the 50s, when conversion therapy is what, you know, gay people were sent to do, everybody likes to think, well, if I lived in the 50s, I wouldn't have let that happen. I would have been totally against it. But the fact is at that time, most people will have done what they've done now, which is like being doctored into it and just like see that as the truth and see that as like the science.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what bothers me the most. Even, you know, I hope one day we will look back and go, we labeled a strong sense of social justice, right? So,
Yeah.
like, we labeled people that called out social injustice. We made that a symptom, and everybody, and I really struggle when somebody says, one of my symptoms is that I have a strong sense of social justice, because I'm like, why doesn't your strong sense of social justice get angry at the fact that a strong sense of social justice is a symptom?
No, totally.
Surely that should be a human. Surely that's a human thing.
I totally get you. You're so right on this, and I completely agree. When I first saw that, and I first started hearing this sort of like, yeah, a strong sense of social justice is a marker for autism. It's a marker for this. It's a marker for that. And I was like, oh, that's where we're going next, is it? Because what you've got to do is you've got to start seeing it as marketing trends. You've got to start seeing it as a form of social control, right? So whatever gets highlighted next as the new mental illness symptom is the thing they're trying to eradicate. Like, think about it. So if you turn a strong sense of social justice into a symptom of a mental illness, then what happens is you start to pathologize people who are concerned about things like war and poverty and injustices and oppression and inequalities, because then you can start framing those people as mentally ill. And so we're on a trajectory, right? In the same way that, think about how successful ADHD has been with schools, where now it's like, if a kid can't sit still, or if a kid is disruptive, or if a kid really struggles in an educational environment, or doesn't seem to enjoy 6 hours of sitting still and listening to somebody kill them using a PowerPoint or something, then they must have ADHD. That is a form of social control. That's pathologizing completely natural childhood behaviors. Children are not biologically designed to sit in a classroom for 6 or 7 hours and listen to one person talk about maths and English. We don't learn like that, and actually other countries don't teach like that, and they're much more successful than us. You know, Nordic countries, as an example, don't even start teaching reading and writing until children are 7 and 8 years old, and they are more successful, and those kids learn faster than British children. And we know that because we can, you know, that's real-time comparison. We can go and look at Nordic countries' data and be like, hang on a minute, these kids aren't reading, writing, or doing anything until they're 7 or 8 years old, and they're outperforming British children every year, everywhere.
And this is the key thing again, is to understand that the child, and my, you know, at least one of my children is this, I was this, right? The child's experience is real, right? They are, everything they're feeling and all of the resulting like stress and like emotion that they feel as a result of this is absolutely real. Like, we are not saying they don't experience that. We're not saying it's not horrible for them. What we are saying is it is wrong to then label them as the problem.
That's right.
The problem is the setting and the environment that they're in. And I compare this, by the way. I think that you look at like the strong sense of social justice, right? In the way that you just described it, yeah. You pathologize it, then you make them the problem. It is no different in my mind to if you're in an abusive relationship with somebody who just goes out having affairs and cheating left, right, and center, and they tell you you're crazy because you're picking up on the fact that it's going on, or they say to you, you're paranoid. Yeah. You're paranoid, right? It's gaslighting, right? It's saying, shut up with your strong sense. Stop pointing out all the problems. You're crazy.
Do you know what's really interesting about this is that I saw some of my followers, because I try not to read comments anymore because they're just terrifying, but like I saw a group of my followers like talking about me and saying like, oh, I've for years I'm sure that Jess Taylor's autistic, and I was like, hang on a minute, I'm interested in this now. Like, why am I autistic? Like, so then I'm like reading it and they're being like, yeah, a strong sense of justice, the way she communicates, the way that she like doesn't care and she just like says what she thinks, you know, and that she's like, you know, almost like ignores social cues and just does whatever. And I'm like, that's just who I am. I'm not fucking autistic. I don't need a label, you know. And it was the way that they were sort of being like, yeah, like because what they were discussing in this thread was the fact that I believe that this is a form of pathologization. So I wouldn't label myself autistic. I wouldn't label myself as being neurodiverse. I don't agree with it. I think it's the next round of language that's going to be used to pathologize, and they're indoctrinating people into believing they're neurodivergent, you know. And so I'd written about this and it had like pissed the whole world off. And then they were underneath in the comments being like, I'm so upset with her because she's so clearly autistic and she doesn't even see it. And I'm like, can you not hear yourself?
Yeah. I get it. I get called autistic a lot online. And some people message me and say that I'm doing my followers a disservice because in not framing myself as autistic, I'm not helping people to see that they might be. And like, I'm like a little bit like people, if people want to frame themselves however they do and want, right, that's down to them. But we're talking about a wider issue here. And to be honest with you, sometimes I'll be around people, right, and someone will ask a really tricky question, right, or in a way that I haven't seen, right, and it's direct and to the point, and they'll ask it and I'll be like, oh, it's a fucking good question. And then before I can answer it, they'll go, sorry, I'm autistic. I just say things as they are. I'm like, no, man, no. Yeah. I think you're fucking brilliant. Yeah. I think you're you, man. Yeah. Don't put that down. Don't put that down to something else.
You're the person in the room answering making the smartest observations and asking the smartest questions, and then you're apologizing for yourself and being like, sorry, it's my autism. Like, what? Nobody else in this room said anything remotely as smart as that. That, like, you know, and it's I get that all the time. And I get it with women because I mentor a lot of women who have been through abuse, or women in their careers, or authors and entrepreneurs and, you know, influencers and all sorts of people and academics. And very often when I'm mentoring them, when I first meet them, they'll like be talking to me, they're really animated, like, yeah, I'm really passionate about this and I do this and I do that and I've done this and I've done that, and then they'll go, I'm sorry, I'm like, if I talk too fast, I've been told it's because I'm neurodivergent, and I'm just like, Jesus fucking Christ. Like, you know, what, maybe it's just because your brain is fast. Maybe it's just because you can process lots of information. Maybe it's just because you've got loads of energy and you're really passionate about your topic. That doesn't make you ill. That doesn't make you problematic in some way that you then need to apologize to me and be like, oh, I'm really sorry. It's because I've been told I'm neurodivergent and that's why I'm like this. And I'm like, well, what? You know, what about just natural variance? Why can't we just be completely different? Like, my wife said something to me once that I will never ever forget. And she said to me, if a species of whatever, let's take humans, if a species all thought in the exact same way at the exact same time, we would go extinct. And she's right, because if everybody had the same thought at the same time and reacted to the same situation in exactly the same way, we would have gone extinct. Like, you know, so we wouldn't have invented anything. we wouldn't have created anything. Even this conversation wouldn't have been possible. At some point, somebody somewhere had an idea and was like, do you know what would be mint if we created a technology where people all around the world could talk to each other using some form of electro signal? And I'm sure at some point somebody looked at them and went, I don't think that's possible. I think you're tapped. Like, I think that's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
At some point, every single thing around you that you can see has been the conception of somebody who has mentioned it, and someone else has looked at them and been like, that's ridiculous.
Mm. I do feel, right, and I can feel, there's a couple of things I'm going to say. The first thing, I can feel my people-pleasing tendencies going off, right? And I'll know there's a lot of people that are listening to this that will identify as being autistic or ADHD, and then I start worrying, I'm like, fuck, they're going to feel attacked by this, right? So there's a bit of that going off, right? I do feel like we are moving into a next era, because so let me try and explain this. I got sober in 2012, right?
Yeah.
When I got sober, I over-identified with the label alcoholic, right? And I looked through the world through that lens in everything, right?
Yeah,
I'd be like, oh my God, I do my toast longer than everybody else. That's my alcoholic thinking, because I've got to have it really, right? And so I just really over-identified with it. And then eventually I realized it became problematic, because instead of like trying to evolve and grow as a human being, I just went, oh, I'm alcoholic, right? Oh, I talk over the end of your sentence, right? It's because I'm alcoholic, instead of thinking, I know that I naturally do that, but let me try and curb that because it doesn't make me feel very good, right? So then I shed the label, and then I like free myself from it. And I do think that people have like adopted this terminology. I think there's we've got a massive pool of like early adopters of it that are like massively over identifying with it. But I do think we're coming into this other phase where people are sort of coming through that now and starting to realize they've shed it. And I think that they will come towards this way of thinking, right? So when you mentor these people, and I'm guessing some of them come to you and, like you've just said, and say I'm ADHD, autism, like, do you give them another way of framing themselves? What is a better way of helping these people who clearly have a set of circumstances in their life that make them feel a certain way?
My philosophy on that is that it's the same as I am with everything, which is, even if somebody came to me and was like, oh, the reason I'm like this is because I'm bipolar, it's because I've been told I've got psychosis, is that if the person is not ready and is not giving me any signal whatsoever with their language that they don't actually maybe fully believe that, I don't think it's my job to almost unpick their language and their coping mechanism and be like, no, you're not, and I think you're this, because that's just not my place and that's not my role. So what I would do in that situation is, if somebody came to me and was like, I really love your stuff, I've seen you online, I've got ADHD and autism, but I would really love you to mentor me, and I need you to understand this, this, and this about me. I just listen to the bit that I need to understand. So if they're saying, I need notes from our meetings because I need to be able to go back through them, or like, before we have a meeting, can we have an agenda so I can follow along? Or like, if I need flexibility, would that be okay? So like, in a way, I just ignore the label bit and be like, okay, how can I best help you? And whatever that is, we'll just do that. So I kind of ignore the label element of it and just be like, what is it that you need from me? And then how can I do that, right? So that's the first thing. I don't tend to do anything about it. However, lots and lots and lots of women write to me and come and see me because at some point in their lives, for long periods of their lives, they've identified as something: depressed, bipolar, borderline personality disorder, ADHD, autistic, whatever. And then they've come to that natural conclusion that they're like, hang on a minute, I was, abused by my parents as a kid, and then I went off to boarding school, and then I was raped, and then I got into an abusive relationship, and then this happened, and then this happened. And they get into that point in their life where they're like, hang on a minute, maybe there's nothing wrong with me at all. Maybe this is like, I am almost like a culmination of everything that ever happened to me, and the way I think is natural, and the way I'm trying to cope is also natural, and these are my trauma responses, and these are, this is the way that I see the world. At that point, there are lots of things we can do to reframe that. So I built the Amethyst program for that exact reason. It's it's a 13-step like program, but you do it one-to-one. where it's almost like a conversation like this, but we focus every session on a particular conversation that almost unpicks the pathologization of yourself. So we go right back to the beginning and be like, we need to understand how much we've actually lived through and how each individual, maybe it's a little thing, or maybe it was a massive thing, maybe it was a chronic trauma that happened 1,000 times, or maybe it was a one-off trauma. Maybe it wasn't something that you ever considered traumatic because you've told yourself it's not a big enough trauma. And then you've sort of like convinced yourself that it isn't that serious, right? So like we go right back and just do not in detail, not like let's dive into it all, because I don't agree with that actually. So it's more about acknowledging the amount you've been through, validating that, and then looking at, okay, but what shaped me out of those? So what's really interesting about that is that some people will say like, oh, for example, like I was in an extremely serious car crash, but for some reason I don't really have that much trauma around that. However, when I was bullied at school for a year by this group of girls, I have never been okay since then. So I'm like, okay, so what's interesting about that is which one of those traumas, therefore, shattered your sense of self? And the car crash didn't, clearly, So like, and that's because at some level, as you've processed the trauma from that car crash, you've either recognized it wasn't your fault, you've recognized that it didn't actually impact your core identity, it's not shook you somewhere really personal, you've recognized that it was an accident, that it was very scary, you're glad that you're okay, you recovered from your injuries, whatever, but you've been able to then move on from that, right? But being bullied by that group of girls messed with your self-identity. It messed with who you are. It fucked up your self-esteem. It made you hate yourself. It made you look at yourself in the mirror and think you were ugly. It made you not want to, go and perform in the talent show because you're going to get laughed at. And so, like, those are experiences that reshape your identity that then affect you all the way through. So these are things that we can do to almost pick apart that pathologization of instead of the language of I am anxious or I have anxiety disorder, it's like, hang on a minute, but where did that come from? When did you start being this frightened? And so the other thing that I do quite a lot with women is change their language. So they'll say to me stuff like, oh, it's just my anxiety disorder playing up. And I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Are you nervous about something? Are you worried? Are you scared? Are you frightened? What fears are coming up here? So rather than talk to me in psychiatric language that your anxiety disorder is playing up, tell me what you are feeling. And then eventually you'll get to the bottom of like, oh, I'm really scared that I'm going to lose my job. And it's like, right. So this isn't anxiety disorder playing up. This is a real fear you're going to lose your job. Let's talk about that. Why do you think you're going to lose your job? So, it's about almost like reconnecting people back to like the real emotional literacy and what's really going on in their lives, because for some people, for years and years of their lives, all they've ever used is psychiatric language about themselves. So they've like disconnected from what they really feel.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I just want to say based on everything you just said there. The first thing is, I think it's difficult sometimes for people when they're listening to a discussion online or watching content that, you or I have produced online. They think that you then go about in your daily lives talking like that, right? So like, if somebody, you're not going around, if somebody says, oh, I'm autistic or I'm ADHD, you're not going, no, you're not. No, you're not. You know what I mean? You're like same as me. Yeah, I'm like, listen, you frame your experience.
I didn't say anything.
Yeah, exactly. It's not my business. You frame. I'm more than happy for you to frame your experience in the way that makes you feel great today, right? And if you want to ask me to have a discussion in this way about it, I'll give you my opinions, right, and my thoughts and the ways that I see it. The interesting thing is, I love what you're talking about with this program in the sort of deconstruction of the way that we pathologize stuff, because I've always said, I was told I had an anxiety disorder when I was, I don't know, like 19 or something, and I always say that it looks a lot less disordered when you look at this disordered environment in which it first existed in, right? My dad was an alcoholic, so
absolutely
it made sense for me to be anxious all the time, right, on my because the shit was about to go down all of the time. But what I find super interesting about the need to deconstruct the psychiatric way of speaking, I've got a pal, and he absolutely won't mind me saying this. He's one of my very close mates, right? He's diagnosed ADHD, and we always discuss because he's sober like me as well, right? And he's on medication.
Yeah.
And I don't want to take medication, like from if nothing else, because I'm an addict, right? And I'll take it for a couple of days, and then I'll think, I wonder what it would be like if I crush it up and sniff it, right? That's just where my head will go, right? But we have chats, yeah, and I'm like, I say to him sometimes, what does it do for you though? The meds you take, and what's it do for you? And he's like, well, it does this, and I'm like, yeah, but we discuss every day, me and you, how we both have the same shit going on in our heads, and I'm like, so what does it do for you? And what we joke about it together,
Yeah.
is whenever he has a good day, whenever he has a bad day, it's because the meds haven't kicked in, right? And he's had a shit day. But when he has a good day, he'll never be like, because I did this thing and I went through a process, even if he is, I don't know, doing a ritual before he goes to bed. It's none of that. He'll go, the meditation was proper on today and I was able to get a load of work done. And I'm like, he has those days at the same consistency as I have them. And they are as sporadic as I have them, right? But he views it through that lens of that, rather than I view it much more now through a lens of, this is who I am, right? I need to set up a way of working that works with me. There ain't fucking nothing wrong with me. And I'm like, there ain't nobody else that could do some of the things that I do, because they ain't got the brain that I've got. Yeah. So they then become disordered. If they lived my life, normal people would be disordered.
Yeah. But I think that's the same for literally every human being, every brain, and that's why I'm not jumping on the whole neurodiversity bandwagon thing, because, I believe that everybody is diverse. I believe that there is no typical brain. Like, we've never found a neurotypical brain. We've never found oh, this is the model brain and this is the model structure and this is the model this and this is, and if yours in some way is different from that, then it's disordered or it's neurodivergent or whatever. But we don't actually have that. It's just a concept. It's just a metaphor. So I think that we would find that, first of all, we know jack shit about the human brain. Like, we really don't know that much. And I think that it's really important that people understand that actual neuroscientists, as in actual neuroscientists, not somebody that you follow on social media who says that they talk about neuroscience, actual neuroscientists with PhD in neuroscience that conduct neuroscientific studies will tell you that we know very, very little about how the brain works, and that their studies and their sample sizes are tiny, and that most of it is still a mystery, and we're still trying to figure out the absolute basics of how the brain operates. Like, you see this stuff online where it's like, oh, I don't know, like, you see all this shit about the reptilian brain and the cortex goes offline during trauma, and neuroscience says that your brain gets rewired. Neuroscience says that if you were abused in childhood, your brain volume is smaller. And I'm like, neuroscience does not say any of those things. Social media says those things and then claims neuroscience said it. But I have the benefit of my best friend being a neuroscientist. And, she did her PhD in neuroscience at the same time I did my PhD in forensic psychology. And we were, we did our PhDs together. And it's fascinating how tentative neuroscientists actually are. I very often send her the crap that I see from our industries, from mental health and from abuse and trauma and online influences and stuff about neuroscience. And we've got a running joke, we send them each other on WhatsApp and we're like, have you seen this utter rubbish that people are being told now? And I remember the first time I started sending them and she was like, how are people getting away with this? None of this is true. And I was like, it happens all the time. It's everywhere. It's in safeguarding training. It's absolutely everywhere. And then I showed her one in particular. I was at a particular event with police forces, and they had this entire video that they showed that was just every single word was wrong, and it was about neuroscience and about traumatized brains and stuff. And I've never seen anything so inaccurate in my life. And I sent it to her, and she was like, "Please tell me police officers are not being trained with this." I was like, yes, they are.
Why do you think they do that then? Why do you think that happens?
Oh, it's because it's shiny and it sounds scientific and it's seductive and interesting. So I come across this all the time because I write a lot of the trauma-informed stuff for police and for CPS and stuff. And when I've gone in there and I've seen the materials, I've just been head in my hands for days, oh my God, I can't believe you've all been trained in this. And it's it's basically, first of all, it's shiny, it's sexy, it's seductive to be about the brain. It's scientific. We use big words. We show you a diagram of the brain and the amygdala and the hippocampus and and stuff. And it's like, and people just take that shit in. They're just like, wow, big words, science. So like they don't actually sit there and think, is that right though? So
Yeah.
that's the first thing. And then the second thing, I suppose, is that it um it sounds almost more concrete than a trauma-informed approach. So if you consider like a trauma-informed approach is saying everybody's unique, we need to listen to people, we need to understand their particular trauma responses and their triggers and their coping mechanisms, and that we need to understand that everything intersects and that they'll have been through lots of things in their lives and that everybody's going to need something specific for them. From an organizational systemic point of view, that's too much fucking work.
Yeah,
Like,
that's my belief.
you know what I mean? And but then also there's just, and I'm like, I don't, probably sounds mean of me to say this, but it is true. A lot of people who teach the stuff around neuroscience of trauma literally just read it on somebody else's slides, or
Yeah.
or they went to a talk once, and they just come out with stuff that's utter rubbish. Like the worst one that bothers me the most, that I spend most of my time deconstructing, is the myth that when you're in trauma, when you're in active trauma, so when people talk about the 5 Fs of trauma, fight, flight, freeze, friend, flop, and all that kind of stuff, one of the biggest myths that I hear that professionals have been taught is that the cortex goes offline, and that that sort of high executive functioning part of your brain just like switches off, it goes offline, and you go into this really like I suppose native, I don't know, like really sort of basic way, instinctual way of surviving, and that there's no cortical functioning, there's no executive functioning occurring, because the brain has this like almost quick pathway, responds quickly, there's no cortical functioning. I'm like, there's no fucking cortical function. How the fuck have you remembered it?
Mm-hmm.
If there's no cortical functioning, how did you make a decision? Like, if you like, what if there's no cortical functioning, you're barely conscious at that. But like, what are you talking about? That the cortex goes offline? Like you're just making things up. And the thing is, that's the kind of thing gets repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated until everybody thinks it's fact, right? If there is no brain activity whatsoever in the cortex, you're in big fucking trouble. The fact that you're
Yeah.
telling trauma survivors that an entire part of their brain just went offline while they were traumatized is ridiculous. And so like I spend so much time having to be like, don't teach victims that. Like,
Yeah.
it's okay to teach them that, for example, if you're extremely traumatized, there's a likelihood that you'll disassociate. For some people that's what will happen. That's not a part of your brain going offline. That is your brain actively attempting to protect you. That's not it going, it's not shut down. It's not like there's not an off button, you know. And you get the same with all the attachment crap as well. So the stuff about attachment, like the myth that you have one attachment style that's developed in childhood and then that's the blueprint for the rest of your relationships. And we know that's not true. We've had longitudinal studies that demonstrate that not only does your attachment style change your entire life, but most people have multiple attachment styles at once. So, somebody could be securely attached to their mom, avoidantly attached to their dad, insecurely attached to their ex, securely attached to their current partner, insecurely attached to their children, all at once. Like it's,
And there's so many different things playing a different
yeah,
role in every single one of them,
there
right?
would be.
Which is like, yeah, because I would always question how many abused people in an abusive relationship find themselves saying, "Oh, I'm just anxiously attached in this relationship," when it's like, you're anxiously attached because they keep fucking giving love and then taking it away and breadcrumbing and all that sort of stuff. So,
so how
it's
would you
nothing to
be?
do with your
Yeah,
it's nothing to do with an attachment style.
yeah,
You're like your attachment is happening because what you're experiencing.
yeah.
And I do think that, like, if I try and if I don't know, grew up and then went to university to study the brain, right? And then my conclusion is that actually the brain just does what it's supposed to do, and all of this is environmental social issues, right? I might end up starting to try and find a reason that it's the brain, so that I can feel like I've got a sense of self in what I'm doing, right? And I do think that the system pushes the individual issue, because then it's fucking on you. If your brain went offline, the fix is you need to get your brain back online, Whereas if we admit what actually happens, which is the brain does what it's supposed to do to protect you, and then as a result of that, you then respond to the world in this way. The issue is simple, not simple, but it's obvious. It's a fucking social issue.
Yeah.
And people don't profit off of social issues. They have to fund social issues.
Money.
They have to spend money. And that I believe that is at the core of what goes on here.
Yeah, of course, because, at the end of the day, whether, like people don't spend their lives looking at systems, but, you clearly do, I do, that this is about money. This is about how much
That's
money.
because we're autistic, by the way, that we look at systems.
It's the social justice sensitivity kicking in. But the thing is, right, there are governments with pots of money and they need to decide how they spend it. So if you can convince millions and millions of people that the real reason that they're suffering is because it's inside their head, and either they have a brain chemical imbalance, a genetic disposition, or they are neurodiverse, or there's something wrong with them, or they have a personality disorder, then you can individualize that problem into that particular person and then make it their fucking problem, and then they have to go out and solve it. But on the other hand,
spend money to solve it. Yeah,
a lot of money, right?
Yeah,
chasing how to solve this. Sorry. However, on the other hand, if you're a government that stands up and says, do you know what, we don't think there's anything wrong with our people, we think our health system is broken, crime is out of control, we do nothing about perpetrators, capitalism is crushing everybody, social media is toxic, our food is filled with chemicals, everybody is getting iller and iller, we're keeping people alive longer and longer because they are worth a fortune sick, to huge corporations that run our governments and stuff. And what we should really do is completely break down society and start again. And we need to solve all these massive social oppression problems. We need to stop war. We need to stop violence. We need to we need to disarm nuclear weapons. We need to change the way we live. We need to stop polluting the water. We need to stop feeding people fake food and then wondering why they're sick. They wouldn't get in. There's too much money. It's too much time. It's too complicated for people to take in. And so much of global and national government is about making big issues either an individual problem or palatable, or turning the population against each other so that they don't notice what's really happening to them. So if you can cause divide and if you can cause animosity, especially amongst the working classes, and amongst populations, you have much better control of them. While they're while people are in a state of fear, they're easily controlled. So that's the same with mental illness. If you can keep people in a state of believing that they're scared of their own mind, the amount of people I've met in my career that are frightened of their own brain, if you can keep them in a state where they're scared of the inside of their own head, you have total control over them.
And I think that is how abuse happens, right? I think that a lot of people think, when they envisage in their mind what abuse is, they think of somebody being chained to a pole and not being able to move.
Yeah.
And that's why they continue to get abused, right? Abuse happens through controlling of the mind, through taking any vulnerabilities that you have and using them to your advantage so that I can keep power over you.
Or create vulnerabilities. Lots of
creating them. Yeah. Making you see your natural responses to what's happening as vulnerabilities as well, right? So that happens in abusive relationships, that happens within abusive families, and it happens on a societal level within an abusive system. And that's why people don't, when everybody says, well, why didn't you just leave? It's because you're forced to believe that there's no other way. And this is what I believe happens with the school system, for example. Everybody just believes, well, there's no other way.
Yeah.
So I have to. Because I've said to people have said to me, how would you homeschool your son? And I said, well, at the moment, I sort of think, why would I bother? There's nothing in the curriculum really that's any advantage to him, and because he's not interested in it, so he won't learn from it. So in some ways wasting my time with the curriculum anyway.
It's interesting you say that. So like, I am actually somebody who pulled her children out and home educated for 2 years for this exact reason. Like, both of my kids are smart and they're now much older. So my eldest is 17 in a couple of weeks, and my youngest is just coming up for 15. But when they were much younger, both of them were not coping in the school system for two different reasons. My eldest was bored out of his brain, and my youngest found it incredibly intimidating. For like, he was just scared. Like, I'd have parents' evening and they'd be like, if we ask him a question, he bursts into tears. Like, he just stays silent. He's terrified of this environment and we don't know why. And then my eldest used to get in trouble all the time because he would finish his work and then he would walk around and pretend he was a TA. And he would like help us. Like, bear in mind, he's like 5 or 6, right? But he couldn't understand that he wasn't allowed to help other children. And he really struggled with that. So like, I would get pulled in and the school would be like, could you please tell him to stop doing that? And I was like, I have. Like, he just doesn't, he thinks that it's his like duty that if he's finished first, he should help other kids. And they're like, yeah, but he's not a teacher, he's 5. And I'm like, yeah, I know. So like, so we got to this point where he just, like, both of the kids were just not coping at all. And then there was a couple of little things that just really annoyed me. Like, for example, they kept having this group come in and try and convince the kids to like convert to Christianity and stuff. And I was like, you're not allowed to do that. This isn't a religious school. And they were like, oh, they're just a community group. And I was like, are you having other religions come in to convince the kids to convert? Like, is the mosque coming or is it just these? Like, and they were just like, it's just these. I was like, So like, there was a few things that bothered me. And around that time, and I was just like, do you know what? And then the other thing was somebody suggested my youngest was autistic and my eldest had ADHD. And I was like, I'm done. I was like, that's it. So I took them out for 2 years and developed my own curriculum for a while, and there was other circumstances that meant that I had to put them back in, but that was my choice because I felt they were ready, and also it would have been a better environment than what they would have been in. So I was really careful with that and put them back into school, and actually they were ready for that and it was great. But it is similarly though, they both went through a really traumatic experience about 2 years ago. So they were both teenagers, and I actually took them out of school, both of them, for 3 months. And I got it, and like people, like the local authority were Mardy, the school were Mardy, and I was just like, it's not in their best interest to be in school. They're incredibly traumatized right now. They've both been through something really traumatic, and they are not able to focus at school. They're crying at school. They're locking themselves in toilets. Nobody's looking after them. The school environment is triggering them because they have to process this traumatic experience that they've been through, and you are not set up to deal with this. So they can stay at home, and I will encourage them to do what they can, and actually what really happened was they fucking slept. Like, because he was so anxious and they had been through so much at that time, and they were giving, evidence to police all the time, and there was just so much that was going on for them both that, it had got to the point where, like, before I pulled them out of school for them to have a rest, it was things like the school and the police and everyone just thought it was totally normal to be like, oh, the police are going to nip in and chat to them again at school. They were pulling them like out of geography, speaking to them about this really traumatic incident again, and then being like, off you go back to maths. Like, the fuck? Like, no. And I was like, you wouldn't expect a grown-up to do that. If an adult had been through what they'd both been through, they'd be signed off sick. They would go to their doctor, they would get a sick note, and they would not come into work, and they would have a rest, right? So why are you expecting traumatized kids to engage in an education system for 6-7 hours a fucking day? It's not happening. So there's been a couple times where I've made those choices, and I don't regret them, and the kids have done brilliantly. They're really smart. I've no doubt whatsoever that they'll do great, go off to uni and do whatever they want to do with their lives, but I'm not being beholden to systems that are broken.
Yeah. And I think we get so indoctored into the systems, right? Because that's what people say to me, like, yeah, but if you took them out for 3 months, they would fall behind. I'm like, fall behind what? Like, when I look at so I remember it when I went to school, the last 2 years we were told in senior school is revision, right? So you go year set, like in senior school, it's year 7, 8, 9, you learn, and then they were like year 10 and 11's revision. And I remember saying to that teacher said to me, about working. And I was like, yeah, but this is just revision. I already know it. And like, I look back on that and I think that's pretty sound logic, really. Because I was, I never did anything for the last 2 years, and I did quite well in my GCSEs because if I'm going to take it in, I'll take it in. And if I'm not, I won't.
Yeah.
And that's just who I am. And I look back at like all the drugs and all the alcohol and all of that I used to get through school. And then I look at my son, and he, you know, we have like these regular sessions where he goes to see somebody and stuff like that. And what they, you know, they'll ask how he's feeling, get him to rate it. And when he rates it, and they're like, and how would that be higher? And he's like, if I didn't have to go to school tomorrow.
Yeah, I know.
And like, they're like,
they don't
you
want
know,
to
you
hear
can
that.
see, they don't want to hear that. But he's like, yeah, everything. Like, so how's your life at the moment? He's like, yeah, everything's cool. Like, I'm great everywhere. I just hate school.
Yeah.
Oh, why do you hate school? And he's like, because I just can't sit still in the lessons. So he goes walking about and stuff like that. And I just feel like we've reached a stage in many ways now where a diagnosis for many people just exists so that they can get their needs met. So a couple of examples of that would be, we had loads of meetings at the school about my son's needs, what he needs to be able to get through school. Yeah. We came to the conclusion of the list of the needs that he had. So we could see it, like here's his needs. We agreed on them. And then the next thing was, you should try and get a diagnosis so that he could get these needs met. And I'm like,
it's gatekeeping.
Yeah, we know what his fucking needs are.
Yeah.
Like this isn't even like get a diagnosis because then we'll figure out what his needs are. We found his needs. Why does he need a diagnosis?
Yeah.
And another example of that is my youngest daughter, or my second youngest daughter. We got her some blue tack to take to school to fiddle with. And after a couple of days, she's like, oh, they've took the blue tack off me. So we went up to school and we were like, why have you taken the blue tack off her? And they were like, well, she's not allowed it. She can't be fiddling with it during lesson. And we were like, yeah, but she told us that there's a couple of other kids in the lesson that do it. And she was like, yeah, but they're diagnosed with whatever it is. And I was like, yeah, what's it? She can't have the blue tack. And it was like, and it was just like, no, because she's not diagnosed. Why would she be allowed to blue tack when she's not diagnosed with whatever it is that they're diagnosed with?
Only the ill kids are allowed the blue tack.
But that's ridiculous. I know,
that's what I
can't
mean.
understand how people don't see that.
When you take it
bizarre.
out of context like that, like when you this is what I say to people all the time, is like, zoom out, take a step back, look at how ridiculous this sounds, look how ridiculous this is. You know, but that what you're talking about is the it's the medical gatekeeping of needs. So, you know, it's the same thing. You get this a lot in education. So it's sort of like, this kid needs this, and this, but we can't provide it to them unless they get the diagnosis first. And then we can put this on their statement, and then they have this statement of needs and da-da-da-da. And then, you know, a lot of parents do then get stuck because, like, well, I don't really want them to have a diagnosis on their file, to be honest with you. And like, well, we can't do anything then because unfortunately, you know, and it's like, that's ridiculous. You're just choosing not to help this kid. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that realistically, schools are not built for any kind of individuality or uniqueness. Schools were built to prep children for factories. That's why they've got bells. That's why they, you know, work in the way they do, and they're groups of kids and they do as they're told, and then the bell goes and they move on the bell or they move on the buzzer, because that's what happened in the factories, and they were training children for factories. So like, schools have not been designed to actually deal with the fact that some kids are not suited to that in any way. And and it's not the teacher's fault. The teachers are working in a system that has been constructed for a very specific reason. And, you know, anything that falls outside of that isn't going to work and it doesn't fit. But there are no alternatives. However, there kind of are alternatives. It's just that people are frightened to do them. Home education is an alternative, and you can do that. It's just that people are really scared, and also because of the pressure of capitalism and the sort of trick of making sure that everybody who is an adult must work, and that being almost like a homemaker or being a full-time parent is not a real job and you should go out and get a job. There's less and less people at home now who can actually do that role, you know, to like look after their kids and do that level of home education. I was lucky that, you know, I was able to, you know, use tutors. I was also able to do a lot of it myself because I'm self-employed and I work flexibly and that kind of thing. And then, you know, the majority of people I find that successfully home educate are usually self-employed, only part-time employed, or their sort of partner has like a really significant salary and they're able to do that. But most people who are struggling to make ends meet and they're working full time and they're doing a load of other things, the first thing that goes through their head is like, how the hell am I supposed to educate my kid when I'm working 40, 50 hours a week and my partner's working 40, 50 hours a week? Basically, we use school as childcare, and the government knows that. Everybody knows that, that school is childcare, and therefore you will let this school control how this child develops, because otherwise you've got no childcare. So it's complicated, but it's, I totally empathize with what you're going through with your kids. I mean, like, your kids are younger than mine, and I don't think I would be very easy to deal with if my kids were like small now. Like, the massive increase in children, like being pushed down this route of ADHD, autism, let's go get them a diagnosis, they need this, that, and the other. That was like fairly common when my kids were little, but it's now prolific. Whereas, I don't know how old you are, I'm guessing we're probably similar age, but when I was like in the 90s and I was in school, I knew one child with an ADHD diagnosis out of all 3 schools that I went to. There was one child, and it's really sad, actually, because I found out recently that he killed himself. He killed himself a couple of months ago, and he's my age. And I remember the way he was treated. I remember I remember everybody used to be like, oh, I'm not going to say his name, obviously, but like they'd be like, oh, so and so, he's just a naughty boy and he has to take medication and he's got ADHD. And I was like, what's ADHD? And like, it just means he's naughty, and it just means that, he does this, and this. And like, this is the 90s, bear in mind. So this is before the language has developed. So it's like, he's just naughty and yada, yada, yada. And I still remember this. I remember his mom used to bring him to school with a black eye. And I'm like, even now, like, I'm looking back at this now, obviously as a psychologist, I'm in my 30s, but I'm looking back at it and I'm like, so that kid was either being abused or was witnessing his mum get beat the fuck out of. She's coming to school with a black eye. And then someone somewhere, even in the 90s, has diagnosed this child as ADHD. And then I was reading like some of his Facebook posts, and I was reading like some of the things that people had said, and like the narrative since he killed himself a couple of months ago is all like, oh, he always struggled with his mental health. He's always really struggled. He had ADHD as a kid, and then he really struggled with depression, and then, he's never coped. And like, I obviously did not comment, and I've not made any, like, I've not even commented anything, but like, I said to like my wife, and I was like, I remember his mum used to bring him to school and she was always beaten. Like, and his trauma is never going to be validated now, because the narrative that's been created online around him, recently killing himself, is that he was mentally ill and he's suicidal because he's mentally ill. I'm like, that's not what happened to that guy. That's not his life story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. And I like, with the work that I do around sort of, parents and stuff like that, like I dread to think how many young kids have grown up in horrible dysfunction, and have reached adulthood believing still, because science and the medical model has told them they are the problem. Like, and I hear it all the time, so many of them wake up to the abuse that they've experienced, but it just becomes, not only have I got all this trauma, I'm also whatever diagnosis that I've been given. And like, that's like, that's why I loved what you said about the breaking down of this pathologization, because that's kind of what I did. Like, I talk about, like, I just had to accept who I was, and I begun to just accept who I was through this lens, and I sort of empowered myself to just look around, and I became very like, it's fucking you lot that are weird, not me. Even down to the point of, people call it, I flap my hands, right? When I get overwhelmed with a bit of energy, I like to flap my hands like that. And I know, like, nowadays they call it stimming, right? And people say this, and then like I'm like, why are you othering me for doing that? I tell you what's fucking weird is that you get yourself overwhelmed and sit still because you're worried about what you look like if you don't. Like, that's weird. That what I do is not weird, man. And that's why it's like, I mean, and this kind of like brings us round to like full circle. It's like fully understanding that the distress in these people is very, very real.
Absolutely,
right?
it's real. Absolutely.
Absolutely, it's real, and like nobody's denying that. What we are questioning is the way that we frame it, and essentially, like in the end, who we blame, because the model that we're talking about blames the individual.
Yep.
It says your brain is fucked now because of what happened to you.
Yeah.
And that's it. And the only way to deal with that is to buy things, medication, and to stay medicalized the rest of your life.
Therapy, an endless therapy, with also industry.
Yeah, industry. I mean, I can't remember who I was listening to, but they were talking about how therapists for children are working for who's paying the bill. So if you've got a abusive parent that takes their child to therapy, the therapist's bills are getting paid by the abuser. So they're more likely, consciously or unconsciously, to work for the abuser.
I agree. I've seen that in many cases over the years. That's absolutely true. I totally agree with that. I've seen that. In fact, I've got a case very, very recently, literally in the last few weeks, where it's a teenage girl. She's sort of mid to late teens, totally understands that her parents are paying this private therapist to make sure that she doesn't, recognize, she knows the game. She's super smart, but I know of this case, where she's basically clicked and been like, my parents deliberately have this particular private therapist that they pay because that therapist shuts me down every time I talk about the fact that my parents abused me. And she was like, I know what's happening to me. She was like, I'll get the right therapist in the future, but right now it's being totally controlled by mum and dad.
Yeah, and the worst part when it comes to kids is the ones that call the truth out are the ones that will get abused harder because they're the problem.
Yeah, because they need shutting down. That's what,
They need shutting down. Yeah. They'll be labeled as hysterical and crazy and scapegoated and all of that stuff.
For sure.
This has been as incredible as I thought it would be, and I feel like we could have gone on for hours and hours and hours.
We'll have to do another.
We will have to do another, yeah. Genuinely, I'm up for doing it. There's a number of guests actually that I've had on where I'm like, we got to do a part 2 because I feel like we're just getting into the crux of it. But before we close it down, do you have any parting comments? And in fact, let me frame it this way: if there's somebody that's listening to this, right, that is autistic or ADHD and listens to this, and it's sort of opened them up a little bit to seeing things differently. Look, if there's people that's listened to it and it hasn't done that, good. That's great. You keep doing you. But for the people that have listened to it and think, oh my God, this has opened up a portal to something new, where do you think they should start? What should they do now?
I think my message, if that is how you're feeling, having listened to me and Josh both talk, is just recognize that you are exactly how you're supposed to be. Everything that you've ever experienced, on top of your individual variance, the way you see the world, the way that you process information, the way that you react to certain people and certain environments. It's so important that you do not gaslight yourself into believing that these things, the ways that you behave, or the things that you spot in other people, or the way you communicate, it's not a disorder, it's part of you. And so if you have this internal narrative that that's the ADHD, that's the autism, it's part of the disorder, all you are ever really doing there is framing yourself and really natural, important, integral parts of yourself as problematic when they're not problematic. They are a very, very important, unique part of you. And so, one of the main things that you can do is change the way you talk about yourself. Is one of the most powerful things you can do is stop framing yourself as disordered. So when you get that urge to say to someone, oh, sorry, it's my autism, just don't say it. Just don't say it. Just do whatever it is you're doing, or say whatever it is you want to say. Ask the question, or challenge the person, whatever it is. You don't have to then follow that up with I'm sorry, it's my ADHD, I'm sorry, it's my autism. Just don't bother. Stop apologizing for your natural way of being. You don't need to explain it to anybody. And if anything, I would say that in this current climate and economy and stuff, you know, what you're really doing there is like opening yourself up to, you know, people who are then going to target you and frame you as problematic, and they're going to pathologize you further. So actually what you're better off doing is being exactly how you are and never actually mentioning it to anybody at all, and just being like, that's how I am, you know, rather than slipping into that language of like, oh, I'm so
people, you know what I mean?
Just don't do it. Just don't do it. Yeah, no, I agree.
Find people that are your people, that love you exactly as you are, without needing it to be framed in any other way than it's who you are.
Yeah.
Find your people, man. Yeah.
And then the last thing I would say, and I know that Josh is going to agree with this, is if you have listened to us and you were thinking like, oh my God, like I've always been told that I've got this like social justice sensitivity thing, or like social justice, like whatever, for the love of God, walk away from this podcast and recognize that you caring about social justice is absolutely imperative to the survival of the human species. That it's not in any way a disorder. You're supposed to care about these things. You're not oversensitive to it. The world has gone to shit in front of your very eyes and it is affecting you. That's not a disorder.
Yeah, the world has dubbed people down to not want to have a, you know, has dubbed people down to the point of they've forgotten about social justice, and the fact that you still have a sense of social justice means is a good thing. Yeah. You haven't bought into that shit. Oh, it makes you set me off again. I want to go off another tangent. I'm gonna leave it. I've got to stop, otherwise we'll go on for Ken. Honestly, thank you so much for this. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and I really can't wait for people to hear it.
Cool, yeah, and me. Thank you so much.
I did tell you it would be dysfunctional, so thank you for sticking around till the end here. And if you have enjoyed this podcast, then please help me to grow Dysfunctional by sharing with your friends on social media. You can find me at Josh_FFW. And then wherever you're listening to this or watching this, please make sure that you've liked and subscribed, left us a 5-star review and a comment if your platform allows it. And I'll see you on the next one.